So by my clock, uh, which I which I set back 1 hour last Sunday, it's 7 p.m. Eastern time. So it's been dark out for about an hour, and that means it's time for our webinar to begin. And I'm just really delighted tonight to be able to introduce an old friend, and by old I mean long-time friend, uh, Reverend Dr. Lovett Weems. Uh, Dr. Weems is a senior consultant at the Lewis Center for Church Leadership and a distinguished professor of church leadership at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Lovett was the founding director of the Lewis Center in 2003, the same year I came to the United Methodist Foundation. He came to that position after serving as the president of St. Paul School of Theology in Kansas City, Missouri, for 18 years, and became a senior consultant at the Lewis Center in 2017. Lovett is a native of Mississippi. He served as a local church pastor for many years in Mississippi before moving on to other things. His years in local church ministry were marked by emphasis on both evangelism and social concerns. His work in Mississippi led the distinguished Mississippi writer Willie Morris to describe him as, quote, one of the persons who added much to the growing civility of Mississippi. And that's the end of that quote, but I would add, and the United Methodist Church. He's a graduate of Millsaps College, Perkins School of Theology at SMU, and Wesley Theological Seminary, and he holds several honorary degrees. Without further ado, I'm delighted to present to you Dr. Lovett Weems. Welcome, Lovett.
Thank you, Jeff. It's so good to be with you and with Kim and with everyone else. Thank you for joining tonight, and hope this will be a productive conversation. I'm going to share uh, my PowerPoint so we can get that in front of everyone. All right. I'm assuming you can see the PowerPoint there.
We can.
Good, good. Well, what I've been asked to talk about is the issue of inviting people to give. You know, folks say that, you know, in polite company, you need not to talk about religion and politics, but it's really money that tends to make people a little more squeamish. You know, just picture people in your church sitting around, maybe round tables after a fellowship dinner or something, and it's time for the program, and you say, well, here's what we're going to ask you to do tonight. Would each of you at your tables just go around and tell how much money you gave last year to the church and to other charities, and how you went about figuring that out? And so you'll see some very stunned looks on people. And before long, somebody at one of the tables will probably lift a hand and say, excuse me, at our table, would it be okay if we discussed our sex lives instead? Because it's the money that's very hard to talk with people about. But what we want to do tonight is to think about ways that make it easier, more comfortable for us to engage those conversations, both ourselves or when people are talking with us about money. And so to do that, I want to begin with some of your own experiences. And first of all, I'd like for you to think about a time in your life when you were asked to give money for some purpose and it went really well. You felt good about it. You gave, you never regretted the gift, and you felt you had been treated well in the experience. You were asked to give, you gave, you felt good about it. Try to think about one or more times when that's been the case. And after you identify one of those, at least one of those, I want you to think about what were some characteristics of that entire process that that made you feel good, that you think contributed to it being a good experience instead of a bad experience. Um, and if you would, put some of those words or phrases in the chat uh, box, chat function of Zoom, so we can begin to see how you might describe some times when you were asked to give that went well. So let's take a moment as you think about those and add to the chat function.
So far, we have one answer that says, I knew the story of the project. Here's another one. I felt I was helping us achieve our goals. The
Okay,
requests I have responded to were clear as to the purpose of the request. These are
okay.
three
So
different ones.
you knew something about the story or told the story. You helped in accomplishing a goal. What was the third one, Kim? And then maybe another one's come in.
Yes, the requests I have responded to were clear as to the purpose. They're coming in now. So clear as to the purpose. The next one had good information. The story, as Barry says, is it was appreciated. Acknowledged your gift and received thank you for helping with accomplishing the goal. The purpose was to help people. I knew that every $10 I gave saved someone from malaria. At my husband's death, his goal was to fill an ark. And she continues that. I really wanted to help with the project was the next one.
Okay.
People joined together for the project, the community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for those responses. Now I want you to think about another type of experience. Think about a time when you were asked for money that didn't go well. You just didn't feel good about the experience. And because of that, you didn't make a gift. And you felt you weren't treated well in the experience. Now, as you think about such an example or examples from your personal experience, then as you think about words that would characterize that experience, would you enter them in the chat box also?
Requests are vague and ambiguous as to purpose or motives of the requester. Felt more like a guilt trip. Then an explanation. Harassment kept coming back and back again. The next one, required or expected. And then Ernie says, request for donation without explanation of what the money was to be used for. Uncertain of how money is being used is the next one. Do you know how much we spend on light bulbs? I felt as if they didn't care about me, just the money. And my firm wanted to have 100% participation in the Years United Fund campaign. Felt I had to give. Those are good, people.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Now, let's look at question 1 here first. Thinking about when we might desire or called upon to talk with others about giving. From what we've learned from our own experiences tonight, what are some things that we would want to be sure to keep in mind in any personal asking that we did based on what we've just learned from these examples? As you think about what one of those things might be, you may have more, but put down at least one of those, one thing that you might want to be sure to always heed.
Make it personal and specific. Clear communication of the need and what the donation would be used for. Focus on the mission. Be clear and specific. Those are 4 different answers.
Okay, yeah.
Speak plainly without euphemism. Gracious. Communicate clearly the need and how the donor can help. Focus on the goal and how it is to be positive. How it is a positive, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so as you think about, you may be so focused on the asking that you just want to get it over or something. But if you start thinking about what are these questions I need to answer for myself so I can present them to someone else, what do we expect that will be different because of that giving? Put the focus on that purpose, not on either one of us or on the giving, but the goal that I know we both share. Now, the second question is similar but different. As we participate, not just as an individual asking for money, but when we're part of a congregation, we may be on a stewardship committee or the pastor or the finance committee or someone helping to design a campaign. What are some things that we can learn about how our congregation asks for giving? I remember in one church I served that had a tradition of kind of a one Sunday annual focus that had a stewardship chair that every year would say, Lovett, I think we want to make it a little more low key this year. And I told him one time, I said, if it gets any more low key, I won't remember to make a pledge myself. But it's not a matter of it's a high pressure or low key. It's what do we choose to include? And so what might this look like? Write down a few things that maybe our congregations can learn from our shared experiences here tonight.
Every congregation is different. A frequent report on what their giving is doing.
Absolutely. What would matter here? What do people want to know?
Don't pressure or shame people into a giving situation. Everyone's giving situation is different.
Keep it positive.
Help them understand the mission, ministry goals. The next one is be clear about the purpose.
Some of you may be aware of two types of churches that some research has developed about. Churches have different cultures about how they talk about money and deal with money. And they found that most churches fall somewhere between two extremes on a continuum. And at one end of that continuum is what they call the pay the bills church. This is where the focus is on what things cost, what the expenses are. It's like saying, we just give us the facts, tell us what we need, and we'll come up with what we need. On the other end of the continuum is what they call the Serve God's Vision church. And in this case, it's not so much about dollars and cents, but it's about lifting up the vision that our congregation has discerned to be that special calling that God has for us. And in the Serve God's Vision church, they're inviting people to be partners in that vision, if that's something they share. So a part of what a congregation is trying to do is to help people see the link between their personal discipleship vision and the vision God has for the congregation. In the Serve God's Vision church, they often will say when someone new joins the church, if they don't have a spiritual background, we don't expect they're going to be giving. But we do expect them and everyone in the church to grow in their giving as they grow in their discipleship. So no church is purely on one end of the continuum or another. But as you hear these descriptions, you can probably think that maybe your congregation leans more in one direction or in another. But churches do have cultures about money and about giving, and they develop over time. And we need to think about what are the pieces of that culture that are positive, that match what we know about biblical generosity, and which ones are really more things that we do that we think will make a difference when it may or may not. So, but for example, you think about those people sitting around the tables and if you were going to ask them something that would not be that threatening, first of all, you always assume the best. You assume that they are stewards. You assume they think about their giving. But the question would be, think about how you go about making your giving decisions. And what factors do you take into account each year? And then any that feel comfortable can share that. And most will share something. Or you could do just what we did. You can say, think about a time that things went really well, and think about a time when it didn't. What were the characteristics? And you do all this because you say, our church wants to relate to people in the most positive ways. So we need help in thinking about what are the things that we need to focus on most clearly. All right. Thank you for your participation in those two exercises. The next thing we want to look at is that inviting people to give can never stand alone from other connections. Sometimes the problem comes when we're asked to give, it's that maybe there's really no connection to the cause that we're asking to give to. Or maybe there's no previous connection with the person who's asking us. So there has to be a time of preparation. And in the church, that preparation should be year-round. In that, year-round, you're doing some of the things that you've already named here tonight. You were sharing ways that gifts to the church have been used. You're sharing ministries that are made possible locally and beyond because of the giving. And you are having scripture passages in the bulletin or newsletter relating to generosity. And you're taking those things into account when preparing a prayer for the offering, or some scripture that leads into the offering, or some mission moment that's highlighted in connection with the offering. So there's preparation, and that needs to go on every day of the year in all kinds of ways. It can go on social media, YouTube videos, articles in the newsletter, stories that are told in sermons or announcements, things on the website, especially pictures. Remember, people hear what they see. And if there's been some particular children's ministry or youth event or mission effort, just to have a picture that can be shown on a video screen, or can be put on the website or in a newsletter or in an email. These are the things that are done when nothing is being asked of somebody make the most difference. And that means we've got to get outside of a traditional stewardship season for those churches that make a special commitment campaign. We've got to find ways to get outside of that, to do some of that sharing. And in evaluation, there are two types of evaluation. One is called formative and one's called summative. Formative feedback is the feedback you get along the way. You and somebody you work with, someone you work with says after a meeting, "Why could you stay behind? Let's talk about how that meeting went." Or gives you some feedback on a report you made. It's that feedback along the way when no judgment is being made. Summative feedback is when there's an evaluation for which a decision is made. It could be a decision about requesting a pastor to return for the next year, or it could be a decision about promotion, or it could be a decision about ordination, or it could be a decision about whether there's a pay raise or not, or a decision about whether a probationary period is ready to be ended. What we've discovered is that in summative evaluation, the typical year-end evaluation that many of us are familiar with, the problem is almost no growth takes place because when there's a decision to be made, that decision gets all the energy and all the focus. And anything that we're told in connection with that about ways we could improve or ways that we can build on a strength just gets lost. So that's why they say that 75 or 80% of feedback should be formative, because that's what really helps somebody grow. And then only, 20, 25% at most should come in summative evaluation. For example, if you're having a year-end evaluation, if anything comes up in that year-end evaluation that's new for you, that's a problem. Because if in your year-end evaluation, you're being told about being late for work, and that's the first time you've heard about it, that's not how it should work. But if that issue comes up, you know that it's come up 5 or 6 other times along the way. So how does this relate to our giving? It's the formative, when no decision is being made, when you are not asking someone to give or to make a commitment or to increase their giving. It's in those times, kind of outside of that commitment campaign, that will make the most difference. One study showed that of the people who were asked in the past year, do you remember hearing a sermon in your church on financial stewardship? Those that answered yes tended to give twice as much on average than those that answered no. However, when people were asked, have you heard a sermon about your church budget? There was a negative correlation. So if you can keep it on financial stewardship, and remember, when doing that, you're interested in 100%, not just 10%. And you try to start from the perspective of the other person. So it's what you call outside in thinking. Inside out is what we typically do. You start out and say, we're trying to raise money to replace this. We're trying to raise money to send the youth here. That's inside out. Outside in is you think about, how do I begin it from their perspective? So you might say, you remember when we were youth and we used to go to church camp? Well, we've got some youth now that we're trying to help. Or do you remember back a few years ago when you helped us pay off the last on our mortgage? Well, as you would imagine, we've got some deferred maintenance that we have now and on that same building. Somehow that you can make a connection starting from the other person's perspective instead of your own. The other very important part of preparation is this. The most important thing in that relationship between a person asking for giving and the person hearing that request is how much credibility and trust does the person on the receiving end of that request have in the person who's asking. And that's why you probably shouldn't be asking people for whom there's not some prior connection or prior relationship. I used to think that in institutions, the word development was used just as a euphemism for fundraising. But I discovered that's not the case. Fundraising really is about development. It's about developing relationships out of which trust emerges, out of which giving feels good and natural and right. So there must be the preparation. A request without being surrounded by preparation is not enough. The second step is asking. And that, if some people ask and they've not done preparation, there's some other people in congregations that they do preparation all the time, but they never come to a time of asking. And one of the good things about churches that have annual stewardship efforts is that at least this is one moment in the year when you're asking people to take account, to make a decision. And that's something that's very important. And the other thing is, many times there is more money out there for mission than we're willing to ask for. It's not that we're saying everyone has to do this, but it's almost if you have a heart for this, and that's one thing that spending time with people gives you a sense of. You know what certain people feel closest to. Is it the children's ministry? Is it our physical property? Is it getting rid of debt? I mean, what is it? And you're able to tailor the ask there. The third piece in this context of asking is the receiving. That you ask, but you make sure that when it's received, it's done well. that it goes for the purpose that the ask was made for, that is processed promptly, accurately, that all those things go well. Now, if you have all the mechanics of receiving gifts in good shape in a congregation, that doesn't mean that you're going to have more money. But I guarantee you, if you don't, it's going to put question marks in people's minds, and it will have a negative effect. And there's one other thing. Thank. The church and church people ought to be the most thankful people. And certainly when we ask for something, we ought to be sure to thank the person. So if we've asked, we need to know when that gift is given, if we're not necessarily the person it's being given to, because we want to, no matter who else writes a thank you, we need to be the one that writes, that will also make a thank you. Now, unfortunately, the church does not do as well as many places do in thanking its donors. I've shared the illustration before of if I'm visiting a church in the early months of the year and I write a check to that church and put it in the offering, usually the first time I will hear anything from that church is at the beginning of the next year when I get something in the mail that's a receipt that can be used for tax purposes. That's not a thank you. Now, when you think about it, why would that be the case? If someone who's not a member of your church, especially, takes money out of their assets and it gives it to the commonwealth of your congregation, knowing that every cent will be used for only one purpose, and that's to accomplish your church's mission. And this is a church to which you have no personal membership or connection. Wouldn't that be the kind of thing you'd want to be sure to acknowledge? And also knowing it would make it a lot more likely that this person would give again. Now, if on the same day that I put that check in the offering plate, if I also sent a check to my college or seminary or to Habitat for Humanity or to a host of other places.
Or to the United Methodist Foundation of West Virginia.
That's right. You would hear much more quickly. And so the church can't take for granted these kinds of things. So you want to say thank you personally. You want to do it many times. You do it publicly. You find ways to say thank you. Now, before questions, I want to lift up the kind of the two mantras that I go with. In the book that Ann Michael and I did, Generosity, Stewardship, and Abundance, we talk about two rules for talking about money. And one is you never talk about people's money apart from their discipleship. If you can't find a way to link your interest in people and their money with their growth and discipleship, then you really don't need to be talking about that. And the second one is never talk about the church's money apart from the church's mission. There's a real temptation to go to the church and say, folks, I mean, I know you've had expenses to go up, but our utilities have gone up, and my goodness, the property insurance has gone up so much, and I hope you'll keep that in mind. Well, the problem with that is if that's what you lead with, people may get the impression that you're really interested in property insurance and utilities, um, and that's not really the church's specialty. You need to find a way to connect anything in your budget you want to talk about to the basic mission of the church. And if you can't, then that's a problem. You see, our churches were not established to give people something to support, but rather the church exists to support people in taking their next faithful step with God, and together meeting the needs of their community and the world. So it's in this spirit that we always talk about money. And if, like as a pastor sometimes, where they had a tradition, the finance committee chair making a statement every year, and that person only knows how to talk in the pay the bills language, then what you can do as a pastor is encourage a different focus, but you can also very publicly say thank you to the chair and to the finance committee. And, they work on these items that have been lifted up. Oh, but they're not there. They're not there except for one reason. They want to make sure that all the ministries of our church have what they need. So when the children are here for their programs, they have what they need. And when our mission teams go out, they have what they need. And so they serve on our behalf. So we'll turn to questions. Let me just lift up a couple of things. Some of you may already be familiar with the Lewis Center's website at churchleadership.com. There's a range of free materials that you can get there. Just type in a subject into the search box, and you'll get usually dozens or hundreds of things on that. We have a free newsletter that comes out each Wednesday called Leading Ideas, and you can sign up for that. And we have a podcast. We also have a store on our website where we have various resource kits where there are videos and PDFs that can be used in a local setting on particular topics. Here are some examples here: optimizing annual campaigns, theology of stewardship, biblical generosity, congregational giving profile, developing your operating budget, building and funding your capital budget. And there are others dealing with stewardship and finance, as well as many other topics. At the bottom, you'll see that we have a 25% discount code that's been entered into the store, WVA25. And if you want to go check anything out, if you make a purchase, just use that code for a 25% discount through November 25. So at this time, I think I will turn my sharing off, and we will turn to questions that you might have. And perhaps again, if Kim could pass along some of those questions, that would be helpful.
I do see a question here, Lovett, from Ernie Downey. We need to remember our baptismal vows, supporting the church with presence, witness, service, and gifts. So when thinking about giving, it just isn't money that we're talking about when we discuss giving. We need all these working together. So more of a comment than a question.
Absolutely. And, when you, um, I have a pastor who does a good job of this all through the year, lifting up those different components in a very non-conspicuous kind of way. So it just becomes a part of the vocabulary and a part of the thinking. And so when people hear it, their heads nod, and then you can come and pick up on any one of those at a certain time of the year.
Other questions? We have several minutes left, and Lovett can answer your most difficult questions about inviting people to give. Lovett, Ernie's comment there reminded me of when I was a young married uh, lawyer, and I was invited to give a stewardship message in my church. I was probably in my early 30s. And so I was honored to do it, but I went to my dad and asked him for advice on what I should say. And he encouraged me to look at my baptismal vows in the bulletin and
Mhm.
to prepare a talk based on prayers, presence, gifts, and service. So at that time, I was using index cards anytime I spoke. So I had a couple of index cards about prayers, probably 3 or 4 index cards about presence, and a couple index cards about service, and maybe 1 or 2 points about giving.
Mhm.
And so I was pretty pleased with myself, and I took those cards and showed them to my dad the next time I saw him, and he said, "Well, you didn't say anything about giving."
Mhm.
And the point was, I at that time I didn't want to talk too much about my giving, so I
Yeah,
tried to cover all the other bases, and that was a good lesson for me.
yeah, yeah. I can see. Keep in mind when you're asking people to do testimonials or anything that you want, sometimes you're tempted to ask the person who you think is the most comfortable talking in public and things. But the most important thing is when people look at whomever that is in front of them, is it someone that has credibility with them?
Yeah,
If it's someone that they would like to spiritually grow up to be like, they may not be the best spoken of the group and all, but if people look at that person as a person of integrity and truthfulness, then it will touch their hearts, and that will make a big difference.
thank you. We do have a couple of other questions here. What is the most popular method of doing a giving campaign, financial campaign?
A lot depends on the culture and the ethos of the congregation. We know that churches that have annual commitment campaigns have more money given than churches that don't. And one of the reasons is you don't have that natural moment to encourage someone to start giving for the first time or to take their next step in giving. So if there's a way possible, I do know, I was a pastor long enough to know that there's resistance in some places. Also today, ever since the recession of 08, 09, there seems to be more people who are reluctant to make pledges while they're giving. So even if you have a pledge campaign, you want to do it in such a way that you're treating everybody that gives regularly on the same plane, because that's the goal. Some people may have reluctance. Some people may have a spouse. Some may have had a bad experience with getting in over their heads or something. Even if you say that it's not binding, which is a good thing to put on there, but it's like some people will feel if I commit to it, I've got to do it, and they're not sure. They don't know what's coming up. So if you, in giving the options for people, if you acknowledge the various situations in your church, do it in a way that everybody will find themselves somewhere in that description, and they'll know it's for them.
That's good, Lovett. Thank you. We have an excellent question here that goes right to my heart from Gary Swingle. He says, with the great wealth transfer of the baby boomer generation, his church is concentrating on setting up a legacy trust fund from IRA beneficiary designations, I assume other types of planned gifts. Any tips on how to get something like that started?
Well, you want to do it very methodically, very carefully. And the wonderful thing is the steps you take in setting that up really serve as the educational campaign for the people who you're going to depend on to make it work. You need to make sure first that you have a very clear bequest policy. Remember, with a bequest, that's anything left in someone's estate to the church. If it's a designated bequest, this is to be used for music, or it's be used for youth or something. If it's a designated bequest, you don't have to accept it. But if you do accept it, you have to carry out whatever the request was. But churches do not have to accept it if it's something that just does not fit or you're not capable of doing, or if it will cost so much more than what the money is. Now, but others will come just saying, I'm leaving $10,000 to my church. And there, you need ahead of time, even if your church has never received a bequest, you need to have a conversation and set up what's going to happen to that money. And the thing you don't want it going for is the operating budget, because bequests represent lifetime stewardship. And to use it for something that has a life less than a year, like the utilities or anything else, that's not a very good way of honoring the legacy of one or two people's lifetimes. So therefore, you might set it aside. You could have it, sounds like this legacy trust is probably going to be something like functioning as an endowment. And if that's the case, that is an ideal thing. So you want to be able to show that how will it be invested? You can that you check out your options, say that be invested with West Virginia Foundation, and we've checked expense ratios, and that's a good option for us. And our spending rate is going to be low enough each year, that is, the money we will be sent from it will be low enough that it will not only be a steady rate, but we will have a total return of that amount plus the inflation rate, so we can use the inflation rate to preserve the value of the money. So the thing you want to be able to signal somebody's minding the store, that it's not just they want my money, but we have a plan. We want this, and we want it to carry out your values that you have tried to live in your lifetime. We want to help preserve those values. We're not going to squander the money. We're going to care for it carefully and use the reasonable rate of return, and it'll be overseen in this way. Or some churches may want to divide it between some kind of endowment type fund and capital, or some may want all of it to go immediately to capital renewal and replacement. And what that does is, by having those funds, it frees the membership for their money to be able to go for other things. And but at least you want to have a plan for how that's going to be used, because if you wait until you get a bequest, you'll have everybody in the church angling for how that money can be used, and it'll happen every single time. But that's just one piece of this larger legacy plan that you are developing. And so you can do drafts, you can get feedback from people and let them know how they can fund that. There are many, many ways, things that you can do, but it can't be done half-heartedly. You need to do it well. The foundation's very familiar with what this looks like, and there are resources available to help you on that. You just want to do it really well. And so for people to have real confidence in it and take pride in it, and then find a way to keep it before the people. Most people can do far more through their estate than they could ever do in their lifetimes. And you're right about the baby boom generation. It was, for most of our history, the largest generation ever. And even though many have already died, the youngest of that generation is, I think they're at 60 now. So it's still a very large group. And it turns out that still involved in church far, far more than any of the subsequent younger generations are.
Thank you, Lovett. Kim, you have a question there. Do you want to just go ahead and ask that?
Well, I heard someone say once, and I don't remember who it was, that pledge cards are less of a financial tool than they are a discipleship tool, that they're a way for a person to set a personal giving goal, and then they tell the church about it for some accountability. But it's a good way to think about them. You're talking, it's a tool for discipleship. Do you agree with something like that?
Absolutely. And you're saying this, only you know your spiritual situation, and only you know what it would mean for you in the coming year to take your next faithful step with God in this aspect of your discipleship. It's not the only aspect of discipleship. There's prayer and worship and Bible and study and all. But for this, you're the only one who can know what that step will be. And it's going to be different from anybody else. And it may seem small to some other people, but you know it's not small for you. That you're going to have to really think about how you organize your life to take this next step. But this is a chance to do that. And have the support of a community in doing that.
Thank you. And Ernie Downey said they quit using pledge cards and they have ministry cards. And I know we often use estimate of giving rather than pledge for the reason you talked about earlier.
Mhm.
Well, we are at time and you've been generous with us, Lovett, and we don't want to keep you over time, but we really do want to thank you. We always appreciate hearing from you, and we hope to hear from you again soon. We won't hesitate to contact you. I know that Kim has some announcements. This is the last webinar of this year, but we intend to have 4 webinars in 2026, and we'll soon be making the announcement about those. Kim?
I echo what Jeff said. Watch your email. We'll be making announcements of the upcoming webinars soon, so you can join in with those. You will receive an email once Allie takes this recording and does her magic with it. We'll be sending the recording out with a list of resources from this webinar, so you'll have that. You can always go to umfwv.org/webinars. All of our webinars, they are placed there and the recordings are there. There'll be a page for this one with the resources listed. So that's a resource for you for now. We're up to maybe 17 different topics are listed on that page, so you can pick and choose which one applies to you if you want to catch up on a webinar you missed. That's all I have.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Good to be with
especially
everyone.
Lovett.
Goodbye.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.